Kia ora koutou. I'm Sean Davis, an Enterprise Advisor at Venture Taranaki, and you're joining us for the first of several Ahead of the Curve webinars brought to you by Venture Taranaki in partnership with the Regional Business Partners Network. As it stands today, Venture Taranaki have supported over 1,600 businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic, with many of these businesses receiving funding that can be used towards professional advice, such as you'll be hearing today from Grant McQuoid. Please remember, we're always here for our enterprise community, and you can reach us through our website at business.taranaki.info. Now I'll introduce our panel. We have Adam Harris, who will be helping facilitate the session, and we're joined by Grant McQuoid, owner and director of Velocity, who will be covering how to prepare your business for Alert Level 3 that will be active first thing Tuesday the 28th morning. Over to you, Adam, to run through some housekeeping and how the webinar will proceed.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sean. Good morning, everybody. My name's Adam Harris. I'm here to facilitate. This webinar is broken into two parts. First part, Grant's going to be giving a presentation, and then the second part is that we're going to go into Q&A. So a couple of things I just want to alert you to. You'll all automatically be put on mute. So this is a broadcast webinar, so it will just be the three of us that will be talking this morning. But there is a way of getting involved and a couple of things that you can do. So the first thing, you'll notice on the panel at the bottom, you've got something called Q&A. Please open that, and this is a chance for you to ask questions. Myself and Sean will be answering the questions throughout. And then what I'll be doing is I'll be collating some of the questions to ask Grant in the second part of the Q&A. You'll also notice that there is a chat box. This is an opportunity for you to just have general conversations, introduce yourself. So if you can open that as well, and ensure on the drop-down menu that you just drop into all panelists and attendees. This will give you a chance to make sure that it's broadcast through and kind of so we can see and keep the dialogue and the conversation going on. I'm also going to run two polls through today's session, and I'm going to start with the first one, which I'm going to launch fairly quickly. The first poll is around being open and alert for level 3. The question is, will your business be open for alert level 3? 3 answers: yes, no, unsure if I'm allowed. So I'm going to open that now, and I'm going to introduce our today's speaker, Grant McQuoid, who is the director and owner of Velocity. I've had the pleasure of speaking to Grant on a number of occasions and know that he's going to have a huge amount of information to share with us. Grant, over to you for your presentation, please.
Thank you, Adam, and welcome everyone. So, just going to share a screen with you in terms of, just so we can have a bit of a slide deck running at the same time. So in terms of myself, I run a business called Velocity. We're an SME in Taranaki, and we're focused on practical and future-orientated advice for people who own their own business, so SMEs. And our focus here will be talking through some of the practical aspects of moving to Alert Level 3. So what I'm going to kick off with is restart planning. So before you even open in the context of Alert Level 3, there's probably 4 key areas that you've really got to think about. So the first one's around the revenue and what volume of revenue that you're actually going to drive into your business from next week. Second one is about your people and your team, but also the resources you need to actually operate your business effectively. Then we'll talk about standard operating procedures, and this is actually really important. So there's some really good guidance on WorkSafe, which I'll allude to, but what are the risks in terms of operating your business under Alert Level 3, and how are you going to manage those risks? And then the most important aspect in relation to all of these areas is around communication. And through this time, you should be communicating far more than you ever have before with your team, your suppliers, your customers, everyone. Looking at the revenue side of things, the key area, and you'll see I put 4 buckets up on the screen in terms of revenue pipeline, supply, customers, and employees. The starting point is actually to look at reconfirming all existing work, all existing orders that you actually have, and how you're going to drive revenue in the door. So you should be making contact with existing customers. If you had jobs that were incomplete, prior to COVID-19 shutdown, you actually need to contact those customers and reconfirm supply so that you can focus on delivering to those who actually want supply and will agree to make payment. Second thing you want to focus on is agreeing around payment terms. Okay, times have been very tough for everyone through the last 4 or 5 weeks, and so you want to actually agree the payment terms for the work that you are going to do. After that, you need to look for opportunities, and it's very important to actually take an opportunity focus to restarting your business. So my starting point for this is actually look at your existing customers and go, who is my customer? But then actually dive a layer deeper than that, right? If you look at your customers, who is your customer's customer? Because that's what's going to drive revenue in, is not where your customer's spending money with you, but where their customer is spending money with them. And that's the same if you're in, even if you're a restaurant who's going to open a takeout delivery service. Who are your customers and where do they work? So how do they get their revenue driven? The second aspect around this is the spend a discretionary spend or an essential spend, or to put it slightly differently, a pent up spend? Everyone's probably craving a flat white coffee at the moment. So if you think about it in that context, where is the opportunity? If the spend is discretionary, you might find that there's an initial peak of revenue that comes in, but then it tails off after that pent-up spend happens. So if we start by looking at a business and we think about the revenue, before opening, you should land on a position of what volume of sales you believe you're going to do in the first week. You should then have a second, third, and fourth week projection, and you should actually be running weekly projections on what that revenue is going to look like. The thing you're actually looking for is peaks and troughs. And what you want to actually think about is, can you smooth out that revenue? If you've got a peak in week 1 and then a trough in week 2, can you smooth out that revenue so that you can focus on delivering consistently and for quality? But also, if you think about supply, on day 1, are you going to have sufficient supply? And an interesting observation I'd have, in the media prior to going into Alert Level 4 lockdown, there was a lot of communication around people rushing the supermarkets and clearing out the shelves. I think the question we've got to ask as business owners was, were we proactive at rushing our supply chains to stock up so that we could start our business again from day 1? Therefore, once you've planned out your revenue, you've actually got to look at it and go, have we been in contact with our suppliers? And these are all actions you can take this week. You don't have to wait till next week, right? Have we been on the phone to our suppliers to understand when we can get supply? Will we actually be able to open and function effectively on day 1, or will it take several days to get that supply chain moving again? Then what you've got to think about is, have we got approval to proceed from our customers? We've got supply lined up, we've got a revenue plan. What about the employee side of the equation? So if you think about it, if you come back into week 1, and let's say Tuesday and Wednesday is receiving supply to get production back up to the level, or setting your business up so that you can actually make whatever it is that you provide. What you've got to consider is, do I actually need all of my team on the floor, or do I only need my sales team? Do I need some of my production team, not all of my production team? So you've got to think about aligning the hours of work that you've got available to your team members, and only bringing your team back at the level that you need them to come back. There's no point in having everyone there trying to work 40-hour weeks if you haven't got the volume of work. So those are the important areas in terms of thinking about the revenue pipeline and what are the implications of that on supply, customers, and employees. The next most critical area, once you've thought about that, is operating procedures. And if you look into WorkSafe, and you'll see down the bottom right, I've actually put a WorkSafe website reference. But if you go onto the WorkSafe website, you'll actually see there's a responsibility on you as a business owner to self-assess your ability to operate. So you've actually got to work out your safety plan, and you've got to identify the risks, how you're going to mitigate those risks. You've got to have a written plan, and you actually have to evaluate and review against that operating plan. So before you can even open the doors, you need to have put this plan into place. Now that plan, at its first level, you need to think about employee wellbeing. So are my employees able to come back to work? Individual wellness becomes a priority in terms of age profile, personal ailments and sicknesses and things like that. That means that individual employees may not be able to work. And you actually need to have a process you go through where you contact your employees and you ask the questions about whether they are medically fit to work and available to work. You then need to operate your business in a way that's going to keep everyone safe. Second thing you've got to think about is physical distancing and workplace bubbles. And the definition is you've got an uncontrolled environment which requires 2 metre distancing, or you've got a controlled environment which requires 1 metre distancing. An example of a controlled environment might be, if you've been into the supermarkets, you'll see that there's those screens up between the server or the checkout person and the customer. That's an example of a controlled environment where you can have 1 metre distancing. An uncontrolled environment is where you have no separation or screening. And so what you've got to consider is how can you create controlled environments within your workspace? And around this is also marking out and defining areas. So as an example, because you're not allowed any face-to-face or sustained close contact, you may have people dropping things off to your business. You actually need to define 2 metre zones around where the drop-off is so that your employees do not come in contact with the delivery team from another business. And you've got that 2 metre spacing. You'll see I reference workplace bubbles. Within your workplace, you actually need to think about bubbles. So your entire team should not be coming in contact with each other. You might have a sales team bubble, you might have an installation team bubble, you might have a product manufacturing or food processing bubble, but you need to have bubbles within your workspace. You also need to think about the context of a delivery bubble. So let's say your supplier turns up and they've got some product that they're delivering to your business and it requires a 2-person lift to get that product off the truck. You cannot and should not send a member of your team to be part of that 2-person lift. Okay, the person providing the delivery should be providing a bubble that does that delivery, places it on the ground or in your premises, and you then have your team go in once that team has been removed from the premises to take care of unpackaging or accessing that delivery. And that's the context of workplace bubbles. Your own bubbles should not be coming in contact with anyone else's bubbles. So it's an important area to think about. Contact tracing. So when you think about COVID-19, and there's been a lot of this in the media about the health and safety side. So if someone was to become ill with COVID-19, you've got to be able to trace who has visited your premises, who have you been in contact, who's been in contact with who. And so you want to be able to digitally document all visitors to your site. You don't really want to have pen and paper there, right? You want to have a system where you're actually getting emails or text messages before someone comes on site and they're answering details around who they are, where they've come from, why they're coming to your premises, where they're going after they leave your premises. And this is all designed around contact tracing if someone was to actually be identified as having COVID-19. Cleaning side of things, it's interesting on WorkSafe, they talk about cleaning being more important than PPE. So that whole sanitizer, cleaning down surfaces, hygiene practices are really important. And these are all processes of your safety plan. So you need to pull that together. I strongly recommend the WorkSafe website. Also, you'll find industry associations have released guidelines around work practices under Alert Level 3. Now, if you go to the building.govt.nz, there's some good examples there. And I'd actually recommend that you don't just look at your industry association. I recommend that you look at other industry associations because they will function and challenge your operating model in a different way. But you need to design your safety plan. Now, on the WorkSafe website, there's actually a template there. So you can actually go through that template and prepare your plan. You can then self-evaluate. After day one, you should have an online or 2 metre spacing toolbox meeting with your team, where you actually look at it and go, how did our plan work? Was it effective? Where do we need to change it and improve it? There's some guidance on the Velocity website as well. The second thing, I've talked a little bit about visitors to your business. So we've talked about contact tracing. It should be sign in and sign out. And it should be time stamped so that you know what time they came in, departed. You need entry point management. You need visible markings and barriers. So if your business has 5 entry points, you might want to shut 4 of them down and limit it to 1 entry point only. All payment needs to be online. So again, we're talking contactless and interaction with people. I've touched on contaminating bubbles, which is bubbles between businesses and within businesses. I think the last point's really important here. You actually should deny entry to anyone who does not need to be on your premises or will not comply with your processes. So as a business, you've got that right. Now, just before we go on to the employee side of things, this is a quote from a business owner that I've had contact with over the years. It's not to do with COVID-19. It's actually to do with how this business owner deals with a family trust, interestingly enough, and equality between children and grandchildren. And it's a brilliant expression. Fair is not always equal, and equal is not always fair. And I just want you to reflect on this quote as we start to talk about the employee side of things. So if we look back, I've talked about the volume of revenue your business will have in day one, and recognizing that the supply chain and the need for operating procedures and just the sheer buying behavior of customers may mean that your revenue in week one might only be 25% of what it normally is, or 50% of what it normally is. Some it might be 100%, but week 2 might be 50%. So what you've got to think about is the business. And a lot of employees may well be thinking, hey, we're coming back, alert level 3, we're coming back to business, we're 100% back on the payroll, 100% back on the hours. Your responsibility is to keep your business running and get it up and running profitably and effectively as quickly as you can. That means you've got to decide what resource do you need, and you've actually got to make the decision as to whether you bring your team back on a reduced hours basis. And the thing I want to challenge business owners around is, at the moment, many of you will have been paying employees at 80% while getting no revenue in. The subsidy, as you can see on the slide, at about $25 an hour covers about 23 hours of work. I would encourage you to think very seriously about, if your volume of work is not there, bringing your team back to work 23 hours. And thinking about staggered shifts, 7-day-a-week operating with split shifts, only operating between 10 and 2, but thinking about how you control the cost of your salary and wages relative to the revenue that you've got coming into your business. And I think this is a major area. And if I had one observation, when the subsidy came out, there was almost a mandate that business owners had to go to 80% of payroll. Benefit of hindsight, that mandate should have been a minimum of subsidy only, and best, if you can, go above and beyond that. So I really challenge business owners to look at the revenue they've got now and try and stagger their team based upon the subsidy. By all means, if you've got good work volumes for a sustained period, or you've got good cash reserves, you might choose to continue to pay your team at 80% if they're not working at 80%. But it's important to try and line that cost up. You'll think about your declaration where you talked about best endeavours. Best endeavours means that you need to have supporting information and documentation as to the basis you're making your decisions on. And if you realistically don't have enough revenue initially, then you should document the decisions you're making and the basis that you're making them on. And then you should have a by-agreement discussion with your team around how you want the business to run and the rate at which you'll actually return to work because of that. The sort of things that you want to talk about is, if you look at level 3, the government's indicated it's 2 weeks, but Treasury's best case scenario planning was 4 weeks at level 4 and 4 weeks at level 3. And so if you think about that, there is a possibility that that 2 weeks might roll into another 2 weeks. So your communication to your team should talk about, we could have an extended period of time where we're operating at level 3. With continued limited revenue, we need to decide return to work hours. Here are some scenarios and options. And I already know of businesses that are actually running one work bubble will work Monday, early start, finish midday Wednesday. Second work bubble starts 1 o'clock Wednesday, works till late Friday. So they've created 2 work bubbles, split shift, working 24 hours each. So they're managing their resource and revenue within bubbles and subsidy level. You've got to discuss your proposal with your team. You've got to communicate the hours of work. You've got to actually get feedback on that. And you've got to reach agreement to vary terms of employment. And you should also communicate within that this plan is actually about progressively bringing everyone back into the workforce. So I encourage you to think about that and the type of conversation you need to have. The other piece is around, this is about making good business decisions. So the first thing, if you reflect on what we've been saying, is to actually make a plan. And at its most simplest level, a plan is actually just getting down some paper, writing one idea on each piece of paper, and then going through them and going, how am I going to solve or address each of these issues that I've identified? And we've already talked about 4 key ones, right? Revenue, supply planning, employee planning, and customer communication. The second thing I'd encourage you to think about is values-based decisions. COVID-19 is a pressure-based environment that everyone hasn't prepared for and planned for as fully as we'd all like to have hindsight. Therefore, when you're making decisions in relation to your employees and your customers, you should be reflecting on your personal values. And if someone made that decision in relation to you, what communication would they expect? And is that decision sound and supported by your own personal values? And then the third leg is that you should have evidence base to your decision making. So you should research and make good decisions. So I talked about your return to work operating procedures. You should be using the resources your industry associations have put together and using those as the basis to form your own. You should also document the basis for any decisions that you've made. So now more than ever, the management by gut instinct is not the way to address this. You actually need to manage through well thought out processes and well thought out decisions, and then sense check them with your peers and other business owners as well. So I'm sure every business owner has advisors and trusted networks that they should bounce off and use as sounding boards. But it's really important that you get the basis for these decisions in place. That's just a bit of an overview on alert level 3 and that return to work. I'll hand over to Adam because we also wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity for Q&A and interaction to deal with the on-the-ground issues that people are dealing with.
Fantastic, thank you, Grant. Yeah, I've got some questions coming through that I'm going to pose to you shortly. If you have got any more questions, please type them in the Q&A box, and then we can go through there. I closed off the poll about 10 minutes ago. Will your business be open for alert level 3? 83% said yes, 10% said no. 7% of people said that I'm unsure if I'm allowed. Grant, what would you be saying to those people who aren't sure whether they can open? Where should they be going and seeking advice?
So your key point would be to the COVID-19 website, and you'll find on there if you follow through there, you'll find an overview of what businesses can open. The other thing so you've got the COVID-19 website, you've got industry associations. For example, there's the hospitality industry, there's the Master Builders Association. You've got all these different industry associations. The other starting point is under alert level 3, no face-to-face contact is allowed. So if you're in a hairdressing situation, it's not going to happen. It's not allowed to be open. If you're a business, if you're a restaurant, you're not allowed to be open as a restaurant. You're allowed to be open for delivery and takeaways. Hospitality industry, cafe, and takeaway's got to be contactless delivery, right? It's got to be person A places the item on the desk or table or counter, steps back 2 meters, and the customer picks up the item and leaves. So you've got to think about those operating procedures. But your starting point, COVID-19 website, industry association, and the principle of no face-to-face contact.
Fantastic, thank you. Right, let's get through some of the questions that have come through. Felicity asks, do the written plans have to be on display once you're open? So with regards to distancing, etc., do you need to communicate that through to everybody within the business?
So I put that in several buckets. The first one is all of your team need to understand what your health and safety protocols are, and all of your team need to be following them, and you need to be checking that they are being followed. So that's your first one. Having the written plans visible will reinforce good behaviour. So I'd strongly encourage you to have them up on the wall. In regards to customers coming to your premises, you very definitely should have something on the outside of your premises that actually explains to them what your protocols are. It should all be on your digital websites, social media, and you should actually be pushing that communication out as well. And I appreciate everyone got overloaded with communication when we went into alert level 4 around, here's my COVID-19 response. But the reality is, if you're open for business, you need to tell your customers this is the protocol that we want you to follow.
Yeah, and I think on that, because we're going from 4 to 3 and potentially then moving down to level 2, but in between, and actually human behavior dictates that we need to sometimes see or hear things 7 times. So the more, and I think you mentioned it earlier, the more we communicate through this process is quite key to ensure that we're adhering to kind of the guidelines. Next question that's come through. Do you identify some good options for digital contract tracing?
No, the short answer is we haven't identified anything at this point. I did see there was a software company that was developing an app, but I haven't seen that come to fruition yet. The starting point, unfortunately, is probably email and text at this point. That's your baseline. Mm-hmm. But if we do see and hear anything, we'll certainly let people know.
Okay. I'm just going to open up this second poll now. So we're going to be running these webinars frequently. So what advice would be the most beneficial for your business during the COVID-19 pandemic? So thinking about potential future topics, legal, HR, marketing, accounting, well-being, and mental health. So I'm going to launch that, and please vote as we continue through the questions. Grant, can more than one staff member be at work to prepare for level 3 before Tuesday in the 2-meter distance, of course?
Good question. I don't have the definitive answer on that, so I'll give you a personal view. So my personal view is yes, they can, provided they do not come into contact with each other and contaminate each other's bubbles.
Yeah, and
so,
I think I'll piggyback on that in saying that my interpretation was it's around preparation. So as long as those distancing is being taken into account, you wouldn't want everybody to come back the minimum amount possible to just prepare ready for kind of next week. Yeah,
and so, you know, if you think about alert level 4, we've got our individual bubbles, which fundamentally are our families. You should be applying the same philosophy that until we switch to alert level 3, if 2 people come in, they are 2 individual bubbles and they shouldn't be contaminating their bubbles. And you've got your 2-meter safety rules. Additionally, you would need a documented health and safety plan around the behaviours that those people are actually exhibiting or how they're working in that environment.
And is that something that you'd be encouraging people to get done fairly quickly and rapidly and have ready to be sending out to those staff that are coming in ready for next Tuesday?
Yeah, your standard operating procedures is your second most important thing. The first one is actually determining the revenue pipeline, and do I even need to open? Can I get supply to enable me to open? There's no point in bringing your team back if there's no ability to generate revenue.
Brilliant. Felicity asks, if you have a 70-year-old employee and they want to come back to work and confirm they are okay medically, can they?
It's an interesting question. I don't have the definitive answer. My view is you have a health and safety obligation to that employee. And so first of all, you've got to discharge that obligation. And that obligation will be around all your procedures and processes. I would be leaning towards a medical clearance for them to return.
Yeah, to just double check and ensure that you're putting the welfare of the organisation as well as the employee in place.
Yeah, it's no different to someone who's been off on a sickness or something like that. I suspect if we go and read in the COVID-19 information, they're probably not allowed to return to work. But quite often the stuff says should and may.
Yeah. A couple of people are asking about recording of this session. Yes, this session is being recorded, and Venture Taranaki will be sending it out with the invitation to next week webinars as well. Just coming on to next one. So somebody's asking that they've got orders to process that they'd like to get out next Tuesday morning. They believe that they can do some of it themselves, but they would like to get other people to come in and assist them. What would your guidance be on employees and the amount of people that you should be welcoming back into the working environment?
The guidance there would be around creating bubbles within your business, right? So if you've got orders that you need to process and a two-person team can process that, you put together a two-person team as a bubble and they process those orders and you get them out without a doubt. But the key thing is during alert level 3, if that's a bubble, you want to keep it as a bubble and you don't want to contaminate it with another bubble. So if you think about your team as being a series of bubbles, each bubble should function as an individual bubble for the duration of level 3.
Yeah. So I think on that, a couple of conversations I've been having over the last few days has been around looking at potentially split shifts. So creating those bubbles, then ensuring that somebody's going in to clean, and then then having the next bubble kind of doing it so that that creates those split shifts. Grant, do you have any templates for planning that you would recommend during this period?
For the safety plan, I'd recommend you go to WorkSafe's website, and there's actually a link on there to a safety plan template. So that's where I'd start for that. For planning, if you go to the Velocity website, we've actually put some templates up there to do with business continuity planning for the transition to level 3. But certainly for that operational planning, WorkSafe website's got a very good template there.
Fantastic. I know that I've seen Lauren on the call. Lauren, if you could just put the Velocity website on there so that people can be signposted through to that. Just talking about WorkSafe, when WorkSafe say we will be actively checking that businesses are doing what they need to in accordance with their written plans and their duties under HSWA, what does this actually mean in practical terms? Are they likely to do on-site audits visits for businesses that are open at level 3?
So I've got a two-pronged answer to this, right? The first one is run your business under the presumption that they will turn up and audit you on the spot, because then you're going to be operating under best practice. The second one is it's actually a self-assessment process. So you should document your processes, and then you should document your self-assessment of your compliance with those processes. And don't over-engineer this, right? You use the template, you create your process, you have a check system where you actually go, this is the check or conversation we had as a team at the end of day 1, partway through day 2 to test that the processes were working, and these are the changes we made. Keep it simple and practical. But it's that documentation that they are more likely to audit, and especially if something goes wrong.
Yeah, and I think there's a duty of care to all the stakeholders, the staff, but also then the supply chain. And if you're following the guidance accordingly, then you know that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, just on that point, I think there's a social and moral obligation for all of us as business owners to actually prevent the spread of COVID-19. And so you look at it and go, that's what these processes are designed around. And the reason this is really important is that if we get the next 2 weeks right, we have the opportunity to go to alert level 2. So we can argue the semantics about whether we believe in the levels that we're at, but that's the world we're in, that's the decisions that have been made. If we operate the best we can under those, then we can come out the other side.
So just pick up on that, because you mentioned earlier about the government were planning potentially to go from, into level 3 for anything up to 4 weeks. For those people that are doing cash flow forecasts at the moment and they're thinking about, the 2 week time period about potentially then dropping down to level 2, what's the scenario planning that you would be suggesting around those two different points about going to level 2 or potentially staying in level 3?
So your first layer of scenario planning at level 3, you should actually run 3 scenarios. You should have a high, a medium, and a low. And you should actually model your business on those 3 scenarios. And I'd actually define it as run your cost scenario side of your business for the low and drive the revenue side for the high. And what I mean by that is control your costs as though the low scenario is actually the only one that's happening. But run your sales team and your communication to drive every dollar of revenue that you can into the business. Then when you move to alert level 2, your scenario for alert level 2 should also have a high, medium, and low scenario. And under that, you should have the decisions that you're making. So for example, I've been talking to some businesses where their scenario for alert level 3 is they'll be able to do about 25% of the revenue that they normally do. And that's their low scenario. Their medium scenario might be about 40% and their high scenario is about 60%. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. There's slower business processes because of the health and safety requirements. There's, if you imagine you're in a construction site, one trade's got to go before another trade comes in. That entire process is going to be more inefficient. If you're running a takeaway business, one customer comes in and goes before the next customer comes in and goes. You don't have 6 sitting there in the waiting area to pick up their orders. So the efficiency of business processes disappear. So you should have 3 scenarios, and you should then make your business decisions based upon those scenarios, including the rate at which you bring your team back, the rate at which you order supplies.
Question come in around the automotive industry. Unsure if they're able to open, not much coming from the automotive industry as guidance. What would you suggest that they do?
So my understanding is that they can, and it depends what you mean by automotive industry, but if you're a motor mechanics business, for example, you've got warrant of fitness requirements and that sort of thing. My understanding is you can open under alert level 3, but you must have very stringent processes in place around your customers and how they interact with your business. So I would be digital payment, so online payment. I would have screens up around any customer service areas so that there was no ability for a customer to come in contact directly with a team member. I'd have 2 metre spacing. You would have cleaning of vehicles before your staff hopped in them and drove them into your work bays. You would have separate work bays for different team members with 2 metre spacing between them. So it comes down to, can you develop operating procedures that enables your business to operate with no customer contact other than that brief, I think it's less than 15 minutes, and you don't want to be contaminating bubbles.
Fantastic. Just before...
Sorry, just one more point on that. You should also be asking your customers a series of questions around their health and wellness as well. For example, if someone's got a cold or flu, you do not want them coming into your business.
Absolutely. So I've just closed out the poll. So interestingly, the HR is something that the biggest one, 54% of people want to hear from, closely followed by marketing strategy, legal, and then accounting and wellbeing. So I know that Sean's watching with intent as to work out who the speakers are going to be moving forward. What I would ask is in the chat box, if you can be putting down any questions that you don't have the answer to at this moment, not necessarily just around Grant on the call, but also from a wider perspective. That will allow us to just collate a whole list of questions and then almost kind of create a Q&A section that we can be answering and helping moving forward. It will, you know, if you help us to help you, then we can kind of push that moving forward. So just a couple more questions before we close. How strict is the no customer allowed on the premises? Does this mean customers can't stop onto or into the premises, or they can come inside but have to keep 2 meters away from everyone else?
I think your first requirement is a 2 meter requirement, right? If a customer comes onto your premises, you would have to have a very defined area so that they can't just go anywhere. So I think if you're letting a customer come on premises, you would have a defined channel that they walk down and a single zone that they're going on. But your starting point actually should be avoiding customers coming on premises at all. I think if you've got a pickup drop-off zone, and that's clearly separated from anywhere else in your business, that would be acceptable. But I wouldn't have customers walking around premises willy-nilly.
Fantastic. If our employment agreement states we have to give full-time employees a minimum of 30 hours work, but only have 20 hours available for them to do, do we have to pay them for the extra 10 hours that they haven't worked?
The simple answer is that you could negotiate. So any change to their employment terms is a change to the employment agreement, right? So a variation to an employment agreement actually needs to be by agreement. So what you would need to do is you would need to discuss with your employees the reason for the change. You would need to give them time to actually consider on that change and consult others on that change. And it would have to be a mutual agreement before you actually put in place any variation. If you can reach that agreement, then you're able to do that. But you cannot, if you're contracted for 30 hours, you cannot just pay 20 hours for the mere sake that the work's not there. You have to reach an agreement to vary the employment terms.
Just on that then, Grant, with the requirement at the moment, definitely in the current level, but for a lot of people moving into level 3, the ability of working remotely from home, should companies be changing their contracts or the terms with regards to working from home as well?
Not quite sure of the context there, but the current cycle is what I'd call a temporary variation to employment terms. Mm-hmm. It's not a permanent change to employment terms, right? And if you've communicated that we would like our employees to work from home and you've got a text or email confirmation back in relation to that, that should be sufficient to meet the requirements. The other observation, seeing you brought working from home up, any business that can work from home under Alert Level 3 should continue to work from home under Alert Level 3. So fundamentally, if your business is operational from home, under Alert Level 3, you should not be coming into your business premises. You're meant to operate from home first. That's the starting point.
Yeah. So last question. I think this is probably a really good one to finish on. So if you can answer it and give us your final thoughts. Do you have any idea what level 2 will look like, especially for face-to-face businesses?
So if we think about Alert Level 2, that's almost the stage we're in before we went into Alert Level 3 and then 4. So if you think about the government announcing the alert levels, Alert Level 2 was where there was a really strong emphasis on physical distancing. There was a really strong emphasis on hygiene, cleanliness, that sort of things. And so Alert Level 2, I think you've got to go to the COVID-19 website that the government's got, and you'll see the definitions in there under Alert Level 2.
Fantastic.
The most challenging one under Alert Level 2 is going to be your personal care, your hairdressing and beauty-orientated industries. I haven't got off the top of my head answer to that, but if you go to the COVID-19 site, and if you go to the Hairdressers Association, that information should be there.
Fantastic. Grant, on my behalf and all of the attendees on, thank you very much for your open, honest and candid approach, which is just you to a T. I know that Lauren's put on the Velocity website. Can I hand back to Sean, who's going to close out the webinar? Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much, guys. As you mentioned, Adam, we've had a really good turnout here of 70 or so that's fantastic. We have recorded the webinar, as we've touched on, so if you joined halfway through, I'll be sending out a link to where you can find that on our website. You please share that with anyone that you feel like they will benefit with that. And next Tuesday, the 28th of April at 11:30, so the same time, we're going to have Jordan McFadden, who's going to be joining us to talk through digital marketing and ways that we can adapt our digital marketing, especially with level 3. So that's a really good topic, considering that we saw 43% of you are keen to hear more about that. So thank you very much for everyone joining again, and kia kaha.